Hi, welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guests this time are three people who are very concerned about the East-West Highway, a new, very controversial project that is intended to cut through the middle of the state to benefit corporate interests. So we'll be talking to Jean Ripley, Mary Margaret Ripley, and Chris Buchanan. All of you, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Glad to have you here. Chris, why don't we start with you? Tell us about your organizations that you work with and where you live.
Sure. I live in Belgrade right now, and I work as an organizer with Defending Water for Life in Maine. We work to protect water from being sold for profit. And we got involved to stop the East-West corridor because we were worried about bulk water extraction, and became clear that we needed somebody to head up a coalition of citizens. So I'm also the statewide coordinator for the new coalition, Stop the East-West Corridor.
Stop the East-West Corridor, and that's
right.
This brochure, this group, a coalition of Maine citizens. And so Jean and Mary Margaret, you both belong to this group, is that correct?
Yes.
And why are you involved in, first, where are you from? And then why are you involved in this issue?
We live in Dover-Foxcroft, which is in Piscataquis County, and we are organic vegetable farmers there and are concerned about this for a number of reasons. One is that it potentially will go very close to our property, but more than that, we feel that it's not in the public interest of the state of Maine or of our county or towns, and are concerned that there's no evaluation being done of that question of is it in the public interest, and that there's a lack of transparency. So for all those reasons and more, we're concerned about this.
Mary Margaret, are there a lot of people around the Dover-Foxcroft area where you're from that are concerned about this?
Yes, there are a lot of people concerned. We've seen a lot of growth in our organization over the 6 weeks to 2 months that we've been involved. It started off with just a few people, and then they put out these flyers and people got involved and came to events, and now we have lots and lots of people, especially in our area and from all over the state.
What are people saying? What's their primary concern?
I think lack of transparency is a big concern for a lot of people. They don't know where the route's going. They don't know if it's going to be public or if it's going to be private. People are worried about eminent domain, having their properties taken, worried about property values being decreased, and loss of quality of life.
Also, I noticed, like in the western part of the state, because I have had the opportunity to travel around, people there are really worried about how it would impact, Maine the way life should be. In terms of, tourism and fisheries and, Mainers that four-wheel and snowmobile in that area, and even loggers and mill workers who say that this is not going to support their jobs, might even impact it so that those jobs go even more overseas. So.
Well, let's talk about this highway. Let's kind of define it and explain it, give people a picture of what is really the idea here, who's pushing it, and everything else. Jean, why don't you start with that?
Sure. So the proposal is for a 220-mile highway corridor. They're calling it a transportation and utilities corridor that would run from Calais, Maine to Coburn Gore, Maine, effectively connecting New Brunswick to Quebec. And it's unclear. It's been called both a private project and a private-public partnership. The state is currently doing a taxpayer-funded $300,000 feasibility study to determine if the project can be economically done for the private investors that are doing it. And it would run. The route is uncertain where it would run exactly, but those starting and ending points of Calais and Coburn Gore have been defined.
Mary Margaret, why is the route so uncertain at this time?
I don't know. I mean,
who's behind this thing? Who's pushing it, and who does know what the route is?
The main proponent is Chimbro Corporation. which is a Maine-based construction corporation. And they might know they know the route, or they have the route in their minds, but they're not telling people where that route is.
So there was just a big, I guess you'd say, public event on May 31st up in Dover Foxcroft, and Peter Vigu from Chimbro came and made a presentation, but he didn't even talk about the route?
That's right. I mean, we do know, because back in February when they were talking about this at the public hearing, and beforehand, Doug Thomas, who's the senator that sponsored that feasibility study that Jean mentioned that did pass, he said that they know the route, that the route is known. That is in a YouTube video. And then Peter Vigu, from what I've heard, actually has a large 8-foot map of the route, and was saying that they weren't showing it to people because they were afraid that opponents would intimidate landowners. But the reality of the fact is, when people know that there's some massive project that might be going through their backyard, they're going to be scared, and the less information they have, the scarier it's going to be. A few other facts that we do know about the road from attending presentations is that it would be a 75 mile per hour speed limit. It would allow Canadian tandem trailers and weight limits. It would be gated. The whole way would be gated. Except for what they're calling wildlife corridors, where I guess they would make a kind of a bridge for wildlife to cross in certain areas. There are many species of wildlife that aren't even willing to cross or go in near an interstate in the first place. So those are some additional things that I could think of. They're also planning 6 interchanges.
And this, I understand, Jean, would cross at some point the Appalachian Trail. Is that correct?
Yes, it would have to cross the Appalachian Trail, and we don't know exactly where that would be. They may have a target crossing point, but we do not know what that point would be.
Now, you and Mary Margaret, you have an organic farm. So, is it that you're just concerned about this because you're afraid that that might drive through the middle of your farm and cut you in half, or is your concern even deeper than that? No,
it's much more than that. Regardless of where the route ends up being, whether it's near our farm or 30 or 40 miles from our farm, we're very opposed to it for a number of reasons. The environmental effects I see as very negative for the state, and the effect on the state's natural resources. It would take a huge amount of natural resources to build this, and those resources are precious, and this project would not serve the interest of Maine, and so it would be a waste of those resources. We see that it would be a very negative effect on the economy. The state of Maine actually in 1999 did a study on the economic impacts that an east-west highway might have, and looked at the economic impacts that highways in Vermont and New Hampshire had on those economies, and found that there had been no clear economic benefit, in their words, to the communities through which those highways pass through into those states from the building of those highway corridors. And they mostly found that it transferred jobs out of local downtowns to chain stores at the exits. And so we don't want to see that kind of a transfer of locally owned jobs to chain stores with no clear economic benefit, as they said.
Which you can see all along the I-95 corridor.
Yeah, that kind of dynamic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mary Margaret, talk more about this so-called public-private situation. It's very shady at this time. It's not really known whether the state is going to be pulled in. Is the state going to really be kicking in money on this thing in terms of construction, and even eminent domain having to help buy some of the lands? Talk more about that whole situation.
Well, the feasibility study was passed as an emergency measure during this fiscal year. So $300,000 of our public taxpayer dollars are going to fund a project that was originally labeled a public-private partnership prior to some public outcry about what that would mean and concerns related to that. And now they're terming it just a private project. But my concern with that is I'm wondering why our taxpayer dollars of $300,000 are paying for a private feasibility study on a project that would be private. In terms of...
So it's like corporate welfare, right?
Yes, it's exactly corporate welfare. And so after speaking with a person from the Maine DOT, asking them why are we funding this project? I don't understand. This isn't something that you would fund for our farm. If we wanted to build a structure on our property or on someone else's property, the state isn't going to do a feasibility study for us to determine whether that's feasible for our business. He could not answer my question. The only thing he could say was that there's two options after the feasibility study is completed, which is January 15th. They're supposed to be presenting it to the Maine legislature. And that would be to either go ahead just as a private project or go ahead as a public-private partnership, which would entail a proposal from the private companies that would then have to go to the legislature.
Chris, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, Chinbro, MDOT, Maine's Better Transportation Authority, or Maine Tomorrow, they've been working on putting these pieces in place legally in Maine for the past several years to create a public-private partnership law so that infrastructure projects like this corridor could be done by private companies with, under the auspices of it being for the public good. However, these public-private partnerships have occurred around the world and in other areas of the country and are definitely detrimental to the population centers there, because a private company is going to be profit-driven. The state is going to be, at its, for whatever inefficiencies it may have, is going to be looking after the public good, supposedly. So once you're looking at selling that out to that private entity, you're in trouble. And in 2010, it was Tim Walton from Chinbro that helped write one of those pieces for the public-private partnership law. With public-private partnership in place and the fact that they're not calling this just a highway, this is a transportation, communications, and utilities corridor, that means that they could, if they needed to, use eminent domain. At this point, they're saying they're not going to use eminent domain, they're just going to find landowners willing to sell. But as soon as there becomes a rub with that, which we expect, because I have not talked to a single person out in the Willywax who wants this project.
So they're going to have to take people's land.
I think so.
In order to do that, they're going to have to get the state involved in some way or the other.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens, let's say that it gets built and it's a private east-west highway, 220-mile route, right? Yeah. And let's say tomorrow, after it's finished, Chinbro company collapses or whatever and goes out of business. They can't sell it because the price of oil's gone up hugely. Yeah. And the state gets stuck with it, right? The state then is in charge of doing maintenance and running the whole thing, and it becomes an elephant wrapped around our neck. Gene, are you and Mary Margaret ready to sell your land to this project? What are you going to do?
No, absolutely not. We don't have a price on our property.
So they would have to take it by eminent domain? That's the way you feel about it?
If they were to use our property, they would only be able to obtain it through eminent domain.
Yeah.
It's like taking somebody's life. I mean, once you give up your land, then you're giving up your ability to survive on your own without being, in this really unequal power dynamic with some large, entity who wants to take your money. And if you have the land, you can sustain yourself, your livelihood, your children, so forth. But once their land is gone, which this is not only going to be taking a lot of land, but affecting all of the waterways, for example, that it would cut across, including the Penobscot River, the Kennebec River, and so many others. It's a huge impact that we're talking about.
And in your case, you're doing a public service in a way because you're helping to provide food to the community. How many acres do you have?
We own 38 acres, and we own woods, and we also own fields, in addition to our farm buildings and home.
Yeah. What kind of farm? What do you grow there on your farm?
We raise organic vegetables and also perennial landscape plants.
One of the things that Jean and Mary Margaret were also on our Speakers Bureau, which is something that the coalition has developed as an educational outreach tool to go to meetings. The first one was at the Piscataquis County Commissioners on June 5th, and talk to people from different perspectives about what their concerns are. And one of the things that Mary Margaret and Jean talked about was how organic farming is growing so much in Maine. And I don't know if you guys wanted to mention that.
Yes, we presented how, as we all know, across the country, organic farming and organic food are becoming more and more popular, more and more people are doing them. And here in Maine, we're seeing that also. And Maine, actually, through the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, has probably the top young farmer training program in the country. A lot of people come to the state of Maine to train as farmers, and once they're here, they generally, a number of them, stay here to start their farms. Maine has very desirable farmland for that. And speaking as organic farmers, you don't want to start an organic farm or any kind of small farm right next to a highway utilities corridor. You're outside all day on the land. You don't want to be right within earshot of that kind of thing or suffering any of the health effects of that. So this would create a swath through the middle of some of Maine's best farmland that would be effectively kind of a dead zone for small-scale agriculture.
So the state, in a way, is inhibiting a real growth industry, in a sense, you could say, huh?
Yes.
Yes.
And the feasibility study doesn't take that into account. It doesn't take into account how it would affect current growth sectors, strengths that Maine does have, or the environmental impacts.
This feasibility study that is paid for by the taxpayers of Maine, $300,000 that the state legislature has appropriated. What is it looking at, Mary Margaret?
It's looking at a few things. It's looking at whether, basically the overall point of it is whether or not this east-west corridor project is feasible for the investors that want to build it. And how they're going to do that is they're doing revenue forecasts. They're also doing truck traffic forecasts. They're going to do some scenarios of what the tolls could be and what revenue could be generated. And they're also going to look at the costs of the building.
So what are they not looking at?
They're not looking at the economic impact to existing industries in Maine, tourism, environmental impact. They're not looking at impact to people's property values along the route. They're not looking at the impact of the bypass effect that was seen in the study that Jean was talking about from 1999 that studied the highways in Vermont and New Hampshire, where the rural downtowns that people are working hard to bring back is going to be destroyed. They're not going to take these things into effect.
So in a way, I'm sure they're saying that this highway will create jobs, but in a lot of respects, then the highway itself can destroy jobs because local downtowns are impacted.
Yeah.
And that's something else that they're not looking at is what jobs would be created. They're neither looking at what would be lost nor what would be created, only if it is economically feasible for the companies that want to build this to build it.
Now, I'm sure that on May 31st in Dover-Foxcroft, when Peter Vigue from Chimbro came there, someone must have asked him about jobs. And what did he say? What kind of jobs will this highway create? What did he say?
Well, I can tell you exactly what he said many times was he was basically unable to give any definitive specs on jobs. No data, no numbers on number of jobs created, what types of jobs, any of that. Just generalities. And what he kept coming back to was someone would ask a specific question. He wouldn't be able to give us a specific answer, and he would say, but I can promise you one thing. If we do nothing, things will get worse. And that seemed to be his bottom line, is he doesn't have, or if he has it, he's not sharing with us any data about the job creation that would come.
Probably because they know there's not going to be very many, right? After the initial construction phase.
No. I mean, the only thing we've seen in papers is 200 toll and maintenance jobs across the entire 200 miles. So that would be one per mile generated.
For the destruction of Maine the way life should
Yes,
be.
yes.
I'm sorry, but this
tollkeeper
is
job.
serious.
Yeah.
But
serious.
most of it's going to be automated anyway, I
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah.
So how
Yeah.
many tollkeeper jobs really are there going to be, and how many tolls are they going to have along the way? I mean,
Right,
they're not going
right.
to have that many.
No.
And what kind of job do you want? I mean, I think that now is the time to ask folks, like, what do you actually want to do? You know, do you want to be spending your life working in, you know, doing a job that would be created by this kind of a super corridor project, or would you rather be investing, you know, closer to home in your land?
Well, let's talk about rail. I can't help but think that instead of building this gas-guzzling highway that splits Maine in half, that if we do have to move so-called product, why can't we use rail? It's much more energy efficient. There's rail lines, I'm sure, that are along the way. How do you respond to that?
There is a rail line that cuts across that part of the state. It's the Maine, I think it's the Maritime and Atlantic. I have a hard time remembering names, so forgive me on that. But we do already have an east-west route that does that. And the problem with the rail has been that they don't have the volume of goods to ship, which is why the railroads have been struggling in Maine so much. So the heart of the issue is not about if we build it, they will come. The heart of the issue is our jobs have been sent overseas because transnational corporations have undercut our prices, the cost of our labor and the cost of our resources. And we're in this huge spiral to the bottom, which the East-West Corridor would just be more of the same. Of, well, let's get even more resources from these people. Let's make them work even harder for less money. And maybe even still, we won't be able to compete with China, and those jobs will end up going somewhere else. So,
But if the rail, let me figure this out. If the existing railroad companies are not making big money today because there's not enough product to ship, then how does building a highway across the state that screws up the state, I don't get it.
And so
help me understand
and so that's
what
why,
I'm missing here.
Right, the East-West Railroad, which exists, is underutilized. And so that would speak to a lack of necessity to move goods across the state as the reason for this highway. And if you actually look at the 2008 feasibility study that was done for Chimbro Corporation, they're very clear in that study that in order to make this project economically viable, you have to tag on utilities to the corridor. The highway itself is not what would drive this, because for the same reason as the rail, there just isn't the demand to move product across Maine. And so in order to make this project viable, and the reason that we believe that they're most interested in it, is to tag on the utilities, whether that's power lines, whether that's gas lines, tar sands, bulk water lines. We don't know what will come with it, but we know that according to their own feasibility study, that is what will make it pay.
yeah.
What's the timeline for this project, Mary Margaret? Do you know?
I don't know a whole lot more than that the feasibility study, which is being conducted, well, it hasn't started yet, but it will be being conducted soon and is supposed to be finished January 15th and be presented to the legislature at that time. At that time, I don't know after that. Chris might know more.
Yeah, after that, they're saying that it would be 3 years of permitting and 3 years of construction. But they're also saying that the project would cost $2 billion. And I don't know of how many people have traveled extensively along this route. A lot of people, I think. But you look at any section of it, and it's complicated. So I also don't know where they're getting that $2 billion figure from, but talk about transparency. I would like to see that bid.
I can't imagine that this private corporation isn't at some point going to come to the state of Maine and say, help us pay for this road. I can't imagine.
And there are certain parts that they would need assistance with, such as new border crossings. The Cowlisand has a new border crossing, but in Coburn Gore, they definitely need a new border crossing. There's a 60-mile stretch of highway that would run from Coburn Gore to Sherbrooke, Quebec, that doesn't exist. And so in order for this to be a reality, there's many other players that would have to kick in.
Yeah, there's also no port connection yet on the East Coast. They're talking about originally, and they promised, Peter Vigou promised when he was in New Brunswick that this would go to the new superport in Melford, Nova Scotia, and this was a commitment that we made to Canada. But then when he's on the Maine side, he talks about how you could utilize the port of Eastport, which is also not tied in at this time. So I think one important piece to note about this, not only being a super corridor and this transportation corridor, is it's part of a larger plan that we've been looking at. The large investors and kind of more elite government officials have been looking at regionally and as North America wide, which is the development of these infrastructure and corridor projects that would facilitate global movement of goods. It's not about Maine or Maine people.
This kind of ties into something that I've been hearing about for a few years called deep integration, where for years now the elites of United States, Canada, and Mexico have been meeting annually to plan for what they call the integration or the merging of our three countries into one sort of corporate economic engine. And it would really be a way of sort of drowning democracy and letting the corporations take control of the entire continent. Is this project, this East-West Highway, somehow tied into this overall corporate vision of deep integration, essentially doing away with our three countries, Canada, Mexico, and the United States, and making us one big corporate state?
Absolutely. They will not tell you that it is or acknowledge publicly that it is, but I have attended several conferences at this point with those folks trying to get a feel for what the business environment is, and this is definitely part of that larger plan.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about, we only have about 2 minutes left, so real quickly, what's the strategy to slow things down, and how can the public help? Gene, you want to say something?
Sure. It's very important that if this project goes through as a public-private partnership, which we think is likely, there would have to be a legislative vote to approve that. And so talking to legislators is a very effective way to make our will known and communicate that this is not in the interest of Maine. So that's one way.
Another way that we have been talking about, but we haven't decided yet for sure if we're going to use, is called rights-based ordinances. It's just asserting fundamental rights of people and nature in your communities proper. So we're going to be talking about that. We've also been meeting regularly as a coalition every 2 to 3 weeks, and we have a very detailed strategy plan and lots of working groups that there's something for everybody to be involved in, so they can contact us.
And the website? The
website is defendingwater.net/Maine. There is going to be a coalition website coming soon. And folks can also contact me at chris@defendingwater.net. And
Chris,
I can...
C-H-R-I-S.
C-H-R-I-S.
At defendingwater.net.
Yes.
Okay.
And I can put them in touch with whatever working group suits them.
Good. And Mary Margaret, you want to say something about what people can do and to help out?
I think just talking to your friends and neighbors. I think that for me is the most important thing. I think people don't know, especially in other parts of the state, there's no awareness of this project. And I think there's some data that in the United States, 2/3 of people do not want the new construction of private highways. Yeah. So I think that the people are there and they don't want it.
Well, good. Thank you all very much for coming on the show. I very much appreciate it. And good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck. Good luck.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching another edition of This Issue. Until next time, good luck to you. And please get organized.